But Steve, as a number of you know, graduated from the institution in 75?
Yeah.
And from here to Columbia, where he received a master's in architecture and urban design. He's back here now to bring back some of the big city experiences and learning to the provinces. He has worked with Tony Costello quite effectively, as Tony will testify in his specialty of urban design on the Centerville project, which just recently won a special honor award, as many of you know. Steve is teaching second year in graphics, and will be offering an elective in the spring on urban design theory. Please welcome, greet and meet, Steve Turnipseed.
Thank you. Okay, can we shut this thing off? Or can I do that? Yeah, thanks. Not too low, I gotta be able to read this crap stuff. How do you turn the light on up here? Oh, we're in the left-hand corner. Wait. They taught me, don't worry, they taught me that at Columbia. Left hand? Is that up there? There it goes. Okay. Well, I'm not sure how many of you know what urban designers are. I know Costello doesn't, and I know Roseman doesn't. Probably a lot of others of you have heard of it, but don't really know exactly what they do, and that's why I hope to show you some of the things that they're doing in New York City, where urban designers probably have risen to about the highest level in the country, maybe soon to be surpassed with the economic times that are befalling New York City. But urban designers are very active in New York City, and what urban design is, my favorite phrase so far is that urban designers protect the public's interest in private development. And I think that pretty well sums it up. They're usually publicly employed professionals. They watch out, or they safeguard the public's interest in development within the city. More and more, they're becoming involved in protecting the public's interest in public development, because the public development of the past, particularly urban renewal, hasn't been overly successful. Urban designers have been able to work their way into involvement in these kinds of things, too. Let me just say that urban designers protect or represent public's interest in private development, and that they're concerned with physical context, three-dimensional space and bulk, circulation systems, professional coordination, change over time, process, preservation, urban environmental quality, and implementation. They're particularly involved in the urban environment, which makes sense with their name. Okay. A lot of the things I'm going to show you deal with a thing called floor area ratio. And as much as I hate to teach you anything, I think if we haven't heard of it, maybe we ought to deal with it before I start talking about it. The floor area ratio is a number that's assigned to specific zoning districts. And that number is multiplied times the area of the lot to come up with the total buildable floor area of a building. So when a developer buys a piece of property, he looks up in the zoning code, he finds out what the floor area ratio is, he multiplies it times the size of his lot, and he can tell how many square foot of building he can build. Okay, manipulation of this floor area ratio is a major urban design tool in New York City. They use it to encourage developers as an incentive for developers to add things that people need, but that developers normally wouldn't add on their own because they cost a little bit of money. So floor area ratio is something we probably ought to understand. Hopefully you understand it now. It's a number, and it's multiplied times the lot area. This first project I'd like to talk to you, or I'd like to go through some typical special zoning districts. Special zoning districts are small areas that have some peculiar positive things about them, whether it's their bulk or their pedestrian quality or historic nature of the street or something like that. It has some quality that people feel is worth protecting. So they designate a special zoning district to protect that. And special zoning districts vary with what they protect and how they go about protecting it. But I'll show you some special zoning districts in New York City. The first one, and the first special zoning district in New York City, was the theater, the special theater district. It was done by the Urban Design Group in New York City. And the purpose of this was to protect the existing theater district from redevelopment extinction. Midtown Manhattan, which is sort of shown here, sort of rural kind of thing, was developing at a rate that any building that was any large lot that did not have the FAR that was allowable, otherwise the building wasn't as big as possible, was open for redevelopment. The developers would buy it, tear down the building that wasn't up to the maximum floor area, tear it down and build a building that was up to the maximum floor area, because commercial space was at a premium in Midtown Manhattan a few years ago. It's not now, but it was. While this was happening, people became concerned that theaters, which could barely pay the rent, let alone keep in the black, theaters were being phased out. Theaters were coming up for sale because they were very low structures or they were in very old structures. They weren't fully built as far as FAR. A bigger building could have been put on their lots. So theaters were particularly vulnerable to this development boom that was going on. So the urban designers in New York City came in with a special district for the theaters to protect them. A lot of the redevelopment that was going on, I might add, didn't include any theaters. There weren't any theaters in that redevelopment. So the special zoning district, the special theater zoning district, provides for an increased FAR for inclusion of a legitimate theater. It's that simple. The FAR, the floor area, is a certain number, and the city comes along and says, if you include a theater in your development, we'll give you so many more. It goes up to 20% additional floor area, and that's money in the developer's pocket. Of course, the developer has to put out money to build the theater. So it's a kind of a trade-off. The theater is an amenity that maybe the developer would like to have but couldn't afford before, and the city's giving him additional floor area, and he can afford it now. I might mention also that obtaining this increased FAR was not as of right. The developer couldn't just look up in the zoning book, see that if he added a theater, he'd get so many more square feet. He had to take his proposal to the City Planning Commission and get an absolute, he had to get a special permit to be able to do that. In all cases, I might add again, that special permits that increase FAR, or the floor area ratio, are preceded by evaluations of the adequacy of the public services and the facilities in the area, as well as an evaluation of the impact of that increased bulk in the area. So they're not just handed out freewheeling, they're evaluated to make sure that that additional bulk won't hurt the area. But in that special district, they're handed out more than they're not. Second one, another one, in Lower Manhattan is the Greenwich Street Special District. And in the first one, we saw that they were trying to protect a certain land use type, which was theaters that were being phased out. In this one, they're trying to encourage pedestrian amenities. And this came about because of the World Trade Center that was being developed there, and commercial expansion in Lower Manhattan. The banks and big office buildings in Lower Manhattan were starting to expand, and without regard to the pedestrian nature of the area. Lower Manhattan has a lot of very narrow streets. Pedestrians clog the streets. There's not enough sidewalk as it is. So the developers were building new buildings, but they weren't taking into account this additional, people movement. So the urban designers came in again, and let's see, the urban designers came in and did something here, and I'm going to find out what they did. Okay. The developer, he gets a additional floor area for certain amenities. In this case, on the right there is the zone, and this is the map that the developer looks up in the zoning book, and the symbols represent certain things. They represent a people corridor of some kind, an arcade, over the street passageway, pedestrian areas of some kind or other. They're all mapped on this map, and the developer can go to the book, look up what's required of his lot if he wants to get additional floor area, build it, come to the city commission, and then they'll give him a certification that he did it and allow him to build the extra. Actually, he doesn't build it first. He comes in with his plans, shows them how he's going to do it. They give him a special certificate, and he goes ahead and builds it then. But this one is as of right. He can look in the book and go ahead without City Planning Commission approval of his design. All he has to do is show them that it meets some very simple minimum standards. Okay. On the left over here is a backwards picture of one of the developments that was initiated by an FAR, a floor area increase. It's got some over-the-street things. It's a nice plaza, some covered space underneath. All these things were bonusable, and the developer got additional floor area for these amenities. This is what they require the developer to do, is build these pedestrian amenities upside down like that. And that was that same lot that the picture was over here, and that was how the urban designers saw what they wanted. They drew something like this, then they made the map to represent this, and they came up with this picture that was over here. They came up with this over here. So it came off relatively close. Urban designers don't control the specific design. They don't control, usually they don't control handrails, and they don't tell you what the size of handrail or how wide the step should be. They control bulk and open space and try to make some kind of logical sequence out of it. The next special district is the special South Street Seaport District. The Theater District protected land use. The Greenwich Street District protected people and pedestrian movement. And this one protects a historic seaport that's located in Lower Manhattan and was also in danger of being redeveloped out into extinction. The buildings were very low. They didn't have a maximum FAR. They weren't anywhere near it. Developers saw these as opportunities. They were getting ready to buy up a lot of them and start redeveloping them into 20, 30, 40, 50-story towers. The urban designers saw that was going to happen, and they implemented this special district. The purpose of the district was to preserve that low-scale character of this 18th century seaport and to protect it from that commercial structure encroachment. It provided for, this was the first district, I think, that provided for development rights transfer. I said the special districts don't always deal with floor area ratio. In this case, what they do is allow a small building to sell the difference between what is there, the floor area that is there, and the floor area that could be there if a developer bought it and rebuilt it. So they're allowed to sell that floor area to somebody else that's building on another lot and take cash for it and use that cash then to improve their lot or to preserve it or to do some historical work on their piece of property. So that's how this one works. Transfer of that development right only goes to certain lots. I think we've got a picture of it somewhere. Here. The receiving lots A couple lots were landfill. Three others were inland lots. But anyway, these three lots, or these 5 lots, whatever, were the only ones that additional floor area could be transferred to. They couldn't just transfer it to any place they wanted to. Okay. Other examples I might mention of this development transfer thing that helps preserve old historic structures. One is the Custom House at the lower end of Broadway. The U.S. Custom House was vacated when the World Trade Center was built. People were looking at it as a development opportunity. It was right on the ocean. It looked out, it had a beautiful view. It would have made a fine 40, 50-story skyscraper for some banking institution. The urban designers have worked with the developers, and hopefully they'll sell the air rights, the floor area, the additional floor area. They'll sell it to somebody else and preserve the U.S. Customs House with that extra money. And also, Grand Central Station a while back was in danger of having a large addition put onto it that would have destroyed it. And again, the urban designers came in with this proposal for floor area transfers, and I'm not sure if it's saved it. I guess it has. It's still there. And the Penn Central Railroad maybe won't build on top of the Grand Central Station, but instead will build on some adjoining lots that they have at a higher FAR, because they buy the floor area from over the top of Grand Central Station. These are some of the drawings for the South Street Seaport. Manhattan Landing is another project that's very close to this. This shows you some of their terminology. These are build-to lines. They try to control bulk, and when you're controlling bulk, you have to deal with what controlling bulk means and how you can do it. And they've come up with build-to lines and different stuff like that. They slip my mind. Although I spent a year working with them, they slip my mind right now. This development over here was a development that was done with some air rights transfer down near the South Street Seaport, and it following some of these restrictions on it, included certain pedestrian amenities and things like that. This is a little mixed up, but over here on the right, forget this thing. This is another typical urban design map. It shows some of the district plan controls, exactly what they are. They've got build-to lines, some visual corridors, some limited visual corridors, pedestrian connections, pedestrian bridges, people movers, and esplanades, and pedestrian space. On the far side there, on your right, is another project. This is a special Atlantic Avenue district. And this district was designed to protect the character of Atlantic Avenue, which had a lot of retail shops. It was a pedestrian area in danger of being altered by some redevelopment near the downtown of Brooklyn. Atlantic Avenue was chosen to be protected. Let's see, the Atlantic Avenue district is a particularly strict one. They wanted to ensure the compatibility of new development with these old 3-4-story small buildings. So they included land use controls. They prohibited certain kinds of land use. There could be no auto service. There could be few banks, and the size of banks on the retail on the ground level was controlled. Professional offices, things like that, couldn't be on the frontage of buildings, couldn't be on the street level. The purpose of this was to try to retain that pedestrian nature, that kind of active trading kind of thing. Airlines ticket offices aren't very active. They're not your pedestrian kinds of things. They're not the kind of things that you care to have on pedestrian streets. They also controlled, not only did they control land use, but they also controlled signs. They dictated the size, location, lighting, and colors on signs. They controlled the bulk. They altered some floor area ratios. They altered the height and setback requirements. And also they controlled the alterations of certain existing buildings and controlled new construction design. They restricted the street wall, the height and the length of it. They restricted the placement of windows and their size. They restricted lintels down to the point of telling the developer how far a lintel underneath a window would project and how far it would extend beyond the bottom of the window. They controlled cornices along the retail street. They controlled the colors that were used. And they also required a certain number of street trees. So the Atlantic Avenue District was rather strict. This is the Atlantic Avenue District. Big deal. Okay. The next one was this is part of the Atlantic Avenue District also. This shows you some of their drawings they calculated the size of window areas, and first floors of new developments had to have a certain percentage of window area. And they evaluated some of the old structures, trying to find out what they liked about them, and required similar kinds of things be done on the new structures. On the right is the Fifth Avenue Special Zoning District, which was devised to preserve Fifth Avenue as a national prestige shopping street. And the way they felt they could preserve it was to maintain desirable commercial uses. Two major department stores had closed their doors at the same time, and developers immediately bought them and were going to develop large commercial buildings there. The urban designers decided that wouldn't be the best thing for the Fifth Avenue pedestrian shopping atmosphere, so they came in with a special zoning district controlling the kind of first floor uses. They wanted to maintain that pedestrian quality. Also, in 1961, New York City got a new zoning resolution. And this new zoning resolution was probably the first use of that increase in FAR to get a desirable amenity. In that case, it was for plazas. And if a developer included a plaza in front of his building, he got an additional floor area increase. Well, I think Chicago has probably had its fill of that kind of thing. What it ends up being is, kind of windswept, empty spaces that people only use 3 months out of the year. The urban designers in New York, the New York zoning code had a similar provision that increased the floor area for these plazas, but they had second thoughts about it. They felt maybe that wasn't the best thing in the world to have these wide open areas that were windswept, cold, and weren't of much value, and they thought of things that they'd rather have, like some enclosed pedestrian arcades and enclosed gallerias and shopping arcades, things like that. So in order to get around the 1961 plaza bonus, they developed some equivalent galleria kinds of things that they'd rather see, and included these in a special zoning district. So they got additional floor area for pedestrian and features like arcade. This is the best part here. Okay, time's about up, so I'll just conclude with this. I'm not a fast talker. I had a little bit more, about 20 more pages of stuff. But, I'll just conclude with this. This is the an urban design rendering of what they thought one of these pedestrian areas could be for the McGraw-Hill building that went up in New York a few years ago. This wasn't included in the McGraw-Hill building, but a similar space was included in, I believe it's the Celanese building to the south. And so urban designers are getting these kinds of things developed into major commercial buildings and it's sure to be better, make the city a better place than it was before, which I guess is the urban designer's intent. I'm going to quit. I've got a lot more pictures. I've even got a picture of Marv Rosenman driving down the West Side Highway, but I think now would probably be a good time to quit and ask if there are any questions. I'd really like to find it. Could I ask if there's any questions? It's on the other one. Any questions? Who cares, right? I might mention that I've got an urban design course that'll probably be about this disorganized, but nonetheless will hopefully give you some real insight into what urban design is. And if you're having trouble getting a job as an architect, it might be kind of nice to be able to know some few words to throw at somebody to get employed as an urban designer. Okay. Whoever's next, I don't know.